I'm going to I'm gonna put on the very best show I'm capable of doing. So I thought I'd read to you for about 15, 20 minutes. I might actually expand by one section, and then if you have any questions, I've already planted one in the audience. But if you have any questions, I will answer anything, including math problems up to moderate difficulty level, although I can't promise that the answers will be accurate. Just to set this up for you, I'm going to read to you from early in the novel. What's happened in chapter 1 is our protagonist, who is a 13, very much going on 14-year-old girl named Jolie Aspern, has had an incident in the subway in New York City, where she lives with her mother. And it's the kind of incident that should set alarm bells ringing around her, and you'll come out of the reading with a better sense of what that is. Strangely, everyone around her seems willing to accept her cover story, except for her estranged father, Ethan, who is living in California. They Skype. This is 2011, so they don't Zoom, they Skype about once every 5 months or so. He's a recovering addict, and he's just come out of detox. So he gets wind of this incident, and he thinks, here's my chance to swoop back in to her life and become the father that I never was. Without consulting her, he decides this, and calamity ensues. So when we pick them up here, he has just made his presence back in New York known with a surprise appearance backstage at her end-of-year academic award ceremony. So, here we go. You like to be read to, right? Everyone likes to be read to. Like a bedtime story. The academic award ceremony was like a low-rent Oscars. You were expected to sit through scores of presentations that didn't concern you, just to catch the few that did. And it would have been trying under even ordinary circumstances. As it was, Jolie felt her need to turn and scan the dark rows behind her as a kind of burning, impervious to anything she might have learned at the meditation center. By hour 2, kids around her had their programs folded into fans. She tried to distract herself from the mystery of Dad's reappearance by seeking patterns in the oscillations, but they were pure randomness, like the syllables tripping from the PA. Up in the second row floated the elaborately braided head of Precious Eziobi, bound in the fall for the high school from fame. Precious, whose own refusal to look back was starting to seem deliberate. Might a narrow enough beam of pure thought make itself felt on those glowing zags of scalp, the fiery mind beneath? I'm sorry, Jolie thought, and take me with you. But damn it, the name, now garbling from the speaker, must have been hers, because a boy down the row was motioning wearily for her to rise. And here she was, as in a dream of disquiet, shuffling toward the rostrum where her certificate and complimentary pencil awaited under the penetrating gaze of her nominating teacher. Which meant she then had to stand up on stage for a minute or more with this hot male hand on her lower back, and who knows how many eyes boring in on her from beyond. And as she waited for some sign of release, the gaze that felt the most discomforting out there in the blackness was Dad's. Wasn't it possible, or even likely, that Mom had at least relayed that his daughter had been hurt and had had to spend a couple nights at the hospital? For why come back like this, if not in some misguided attempt to comfort and to help? And if Mom had told him that much, then why not the rest of what she'd taken to be the full story? How close was Jolie here to real exposure? You were supposed to exit stage left and recirculate to your seat, but Jolie found herself shoving through a door to an outer corridor. "Eagles!" the wall screamed. Otherwise, the school was like a body emptied of breath. Even the front office was inert, blinds drawn. And when she reached the avenue outside, Hamid, the nut guy, had been raptured away. Dad would have no idea which corner to meet on, assuming he'd remembered they were supposed to meet in the first place. Or that, out of some unconfessable need, she thought, scanning the bright clots of pedestrians that kept failing to contain him. She hadn't hallucinated him altogether. For 10 minutes, she traipsed from one end of the block to the other, texted the last number she had for him, not even sure it still worked, watched her award-winning syntax decay. Yo, am outside. Where are you? But by this point, the ceremony was over. The other audience members starting to spill from the school. And the one catching her on the steps, on the verge of plunging back in, was Mom. The certificate shot from her hands. Oh, Jolie, don't look like that. This award is a good thing, right? Brandon says you're a born writer. It's not that, she said, and was struggling to frame another fib when a two-tone whistle rang out behind her. And here I would perform a two-tone whistle if I was capable of doing that. That's my father always did. Perfect, came Dad's voice. Both of you in one place. The flight of Mom's hand to her heart seemed to douse any remaining whiff of conspiracy. Ethan? What the hell? Sorry, I wasn't trying to spring anything on you, as I told Jolie. But what was all the packing, the mad dash to the airport? Hang on. You knew about this, Jolie? Yeah, as of about a minute before the ceremony. Breathe, Sarah, he suggested. I'm only back for 10 days. But now that gorgeous fat girl was passing a few yards away. Have a great summer. And though it wasn't clear amid the throng whom she meant, the three of them must have looked like a travesty of a family. The parents, scarcely more than teenagers, their spacing slightly off. Jolie could see only one way to smash the picture. Mom, wasn't there supposed to be a lunch or something? No, you're right. Mom reached out to tuck a stray hair behind her daughter's ear, a gesture that at first seemed grateful but was maybe just proprietary, because out of nowhere, she was turning to tell Dad he might as well come along and account for himself over a meal like civilized people. Unless, of course, you have somewhere better to be. The ensuing stare-off would find Jolie trying to melt into the sidewalk actively resisting, and these unimaginable lovers, her parents, grappling silently past the moment when Mom might have backed out or Dad backed down. Then came that curious flush again beneath his tan. This is all the baggage I brought with me, Sarah. So unless there's something else you need to go back for, I reckon go ahead and lead on. The reservation was at one of those Szechuan caverns on Lexington. Though booking ahead had hardly been necessary, this deep into lunchtime, they could have taken any two tables in the dining room and shuttled Jolie back and forth in between. Still, the fiction that everyone had outgrown bitterness entailed Mom upgrading the reservation to a single party of 5, that is, herself and Jolie and Dad, plus Nana and Albert, already waiting at the larger table with foreboding looks, as if their opinion of Ethan Aspern had sunk even lower than Mom's. Or, interesting question actually, does the absence of any love to begin with lessen the eventual hatred? Seated there under a canopy of upside-down umbrellas, Jolie would have plenty of time to consider. Albert, to her right, seemed determined to proceed as if Dad, to her left, wasn't there, while Nana's insistence on a round of dumplings to start seemed equally punitive, insofar as it would prolong a meal. It fell to Mom to keep the shuttlecock of small talk aloft. At intervals, some remark about Jolie's essay or the upcoming pennant race would sail forth into the ether. But even a noisier space couldn't have drowned out the lack of reply. And that was before Dad excused himself, ostensibly to visit the men's room, and came back with his sunglasses still on. Nana reached for the duck sauce, sending a brisk little jiggle through the Lazy Susan's tchotchkes. In the end, Jolie would have to nudge him, touch fingers to temples. He mimicked the gesture, and in so doing, discovered the sunglasses and removed them. "Sorry, honey," he said, sotto voce. "Must be a bit jet-lagged still." At which point, as if to curtail further embarrassment, Albert hoisted onto the table a yellow shopping bag he'd had at his feet. "We felt sorry about missing your big moment, Jolie, so we jumped into the Strand for a birthday present." "Geez, guys, what did I say about this? Besides, my birthday's not for another week." Far from dragging him down from Olympus, retirement had wafted her grandfather higher into those realms of tweedy abstraction where even the rattle of ice cubes in his glass count as raw emotion. "Go ahead, Jolie. Open it." "Go on, dear," Nana said. The book inside was a slim brown hardcover sans jacket. Mircea Eliade, or however you pronounce it, The Myth of the Eternal Return. "Your mom said you've been interested in this sort of thing," Albert said. Yet how to explain the last ember of Jolie's interest being snuffed at precisely that moment, except to say that the number of people poking around in her inner life had grown insupportable. "Really, you guys didn't have to get me anything. But it's great. Thanks." "Well, we didn't want you to think we'd forgotten," Nana said. "Amid all this other mishigas," Albert added. She was just starting to worry again what Mom might have let slip, and to whom, when Dad leapt in defensively. "Don't think for a second I forgot your birthday either, honey. In fact, that's the other reason I came here." "Oh, not you too," said Jolie, since the indiscriminacy of his gifts, violin, socks, the box of his mother's old music, had a way of drowning out the recipient. "Can't you just donate something in my name?" "No, listen, honey. Your great anti-materialism campaign of 2010, I remember that. I respect it. But my thinking was, your birthday's the 3rd, right? I've got a hotel room in Brooklyn until the 5th, and in between is the holiday. So why don't you come spend one of those nights with me? We could see some music, hit that place Roberta's for pizza, or however you wanted to celebrate." There was a 50% chance he was ad-libbing, and a 50% chance a full-blown sleepover had been his goal all along, and he just confabulated the rest of his comeback tour. At any rate, half of what he was peddling here was bogus, but Jolie's main concern was to slip through in one piece. "Maybe," she said. "We'll see." At which point, Mom tried to change the subject. "Hey, look! Fortune cookies! Who wants one?" But her father remained that rare personality type, impulsive-compulsive, meaning no matter how lightly he'd gotten onto a thing, he couldn't let it go. "Sorry, did I miss the part where we finished our entrees? Jolie's barely touched her pork." Mom seemed unmoved. "I'm just trying to be polite, Ethan. You and I can debate the wisdom of a formal custody visit later, but you know this isn't the time or place." "Hang on, though. Isn't your whole line that Jolie's old enough now to make her own choices?" "She's 13, Ethan." In the pause that followed, Nana could be heard rubbing a pair of chopsticks together beneath her napkin as if to start a diversionary fire. Then Albert, who'd been brooding over his fortune, slid back his chair and rose to the full majesty of his 5 feet 8 inches. "An army of waiters, and where are they when you need them? I'll just go and rustle up the check. Or was someone else going to pay for all this? No? Didn't think so." After a few seconds, Nan's napkin dropped to her plate. "Let me just go see if Al needs help." But then she didn't move. Jolie could feel the knot of her earbuds in her skirt's pocket, like a tether to an Earth One just out of reach. "Yup, this sure is fun," she said. Let's be sure to all do this again sometime in the near future. It isn't something to be flip about, Mom said, meaning, go easy on your grandparents. But now, Dad had his wish. Everything had become about him. My point exactly, he said. It's a serious proposal I'm making. Ethan, I might have believed that if you could live up to even the most minimal expectations of a serious person. Like calling ahead before you come flying across the country. Can't you see I'm trying here, Sarah? The flight's not something I undertake lightly. You know the kind of budget I'm on. Having lost the thread, Mom tried to recover with a flourish of open-mindedness. Jolie, is a sleepover with your dad something you feel strongly about? You're right, she answered quietly. We could discuss it another time. Why not now? It's all in one place, Dad said. Because I feel a little ambushed is why, Dad. Is there even a spare bed where you're staying? For the third time, he reddened, though perhaps an hour of open hostility from his old in-laws had at last sunk in. We can fix it in the mix, as they say. Come for the 4th. We'll go walk the bridge, catch the fireworks from up there. Nana was giving Mom the tiny headshake of the third base coach, which, when Dad noticed it, became less subtle. We talked about that trip to Montreal this year, Sarah, remember? Canada? For the 4th of July? Eleanor, honestly, does Jolie even have a passport? Jolie loved her grandmother, and in fact, did have a passport. But it was oddly gratifying to see her wrong-footed like this. Well, we did talk about it, Nana huffed. Listen, Mom said, with finality. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I've arranged for us to spend Jolie's birthday out at Montauk. It was supposed to be a surprise, a girls' weekend, just the two of us. What the phrase girls' weekend conjured for Jolie was the furthest thing from excitement. Turbans made of towels, coins of cucumber over the eyes, and this was the first she'd heard of it. Yet the effrontery paled next to Dad's, so when Mom said she was glad, really, to see him taking an interest, but he should have given advance notice, Jolie kept her trap shut. As she would 5 minutes later, under the awning outside, when he buttonholed her to ask if he could at least walk her home. She looked around for backup, but Albert had withdrawn to the Volvo, and Mom, debating with Nana the relative merits of the Henry Hudson and the Transverse, seemed not to hear. Dad, seriously, it's like 4 miles at least. Just to Union Square then, and I can be your chaperone on the train. She could physically feel the air leaving her body. Who said anything about needing a chaperone on the train? You're the one arguing how mature I am. Cicerone. Sorry. I only meant the ride would give us a chance to catch up. I'm sure Mom has thoughts, she said. But Mom was just turning to say it sounded like a reasonable request. You have your keys, sweetheart? I'll meet you back at the apartment. Then, as if this were secretly her daughter's wish, she slid into the car's back seat and was whisked away by a light, leaving Jolie, the very thing she was suddenly keenest to avoid, alone with her dad. It was that post-lunch hour in warm weather Manhattan when office workers struggle to stay awake, and even the traffic dies a little. As she walked, she could hear the scuff of her own sneakers on the pavement. It had never occurred to her that their name might be onomatopoetic. Then he tried to loop an arm through hers, and she flinched. Sorry, forgot about your shoulder. It was the slip she'd been waiting for. So she did call to talk about the shoulder, huh? And the bump on the head too, I'm guessing? A minute passed. Honey, listen. You can't really have expected your mother to keep something that serious from me, right? As serious as getting dinged by loose debris? As serious as being on the wrong side of an oncoming train. And oh, how she hated the way he called her mother your mother. The way he made the whole thing sound like a crisis rather than a lapse. And that's the real reason you're back? Mom telling you? She waited for a denial. But he just said, don't hold it against her, Jolie. It was 100% true about her not knowing my plans. We're just trying to figure out how to give you what you need. She turtled deeper into her jacket. What she needed was for everyone to stop acting like the return of Ethan Aspern could mean anything but further misery. There were 6 other kids with divorced parents in her homeroom this year, and you didn't see any of them having meals together, except Enzo's. And Enzo's dad was gay. But to say that aloud would have been to abandon a principle. Chuck. You had to have been terrified down there, he continued. I know I was when I heard. And regardless of the party line, I was thinking you and I could figure out a way to steal some time to get together. Like you said, before I have to go back to California. Even if it's just going for walks like this. What? So you can make sure I don't chase a ball in front of a truck or something? Is that such a terrible thing for a father to want? He seemed to brood on it for a moment. But look, there's something I need to make sure of first. And the gap that followed was just long enough for her to think anything else. Let it be literally anything else besides this. It was an accident, right? Jesus Christ, Dad, how can you even ask a thing like that? Well, okay then. It's not an accusation, just I have my reasons. You're a poetry person, she said. You ever hear of this guy Larkin? We read him in English last semester. He has this one poem that starts like, parents, they fuck you up. Intending to alleviate the pressure, she had somehow only made it worse. Honey, I practically wrote that poem, he was saying. The thing is, in certain key familial respects, maybe you and I aren't so different. It's been 3 years since you took off without me, Dad. I don't know why you're expecting to know the first thing about the way we are or aren't alike, much less where it comes from. I guess you never got around to watching that video of my mom's then, he said. Her big, quote-unquote, requiem. Other people. Great. Just her luck. Not a mixtape, but a whole fucking DVD's worth of origin story. Yet scratched beyond playability. By the way, that alludes to something earlier in the book. She's got her grandmother's CD collection under her bed at home. Anyway, what do you want me to say here, Joe? Sooner or later, you're going to have to try a little understanding. And let me guess, you thought you could just show up and it would magically happen? They'd reached Park now, where from a couple blocks down, a bus was approaching. She was amazed to realize again that there was no decisive moment, only a before and an after. And still, crazily, she almost yielded to her earlier longing to let him pull her back in, press her face against his chest, and smell his smell. Look, you've obviously come a long way and spent a ton of money to be here. But if my needs are the issue for once, then what you can give me is my fucking space, okay? She could feel a busload of reinforcements arriving behind her. Which doesn't cost you anything, which is free. Maybe I'll feel differently when you're back out in La La Land or whatever, and we can talk. But meantime, best of luck with your other business. What other business? He said, as she mounted toward the stone-faced driver. She didn't look back, though, since nowadays the knife she'd sought to twist seemed double-bladed, meaning there was no way to jam it any deeper into her dad without bringing more pain upon herself. Thank you. So that's like, I chose that passage because it's like, you know, it's like a rough tour of, you know, the contours of the book. Kind of slightly damaged dad, slightly damaged daughter, and this. I would be more than happy to answer literally any question you want to ask. Yes.
I guess 2 questions. What inspired you to write this book? And like, I know you have your own children, so did writing the characters of Jolie and her father like help you like explore your own relationship with your own children? And like, being a parent of a teenager and knowing that there's like some separation coming between you two?
Totally, and that's a really good question. The book actually was rooted, like I first had this idea in the late 90s, which is a strange thing about my work, like things tend to just take a long time to gestate. And I think the original place that it came, well, originally it sort of came out of two things. It was, one, my own father was quite an interesting character. I was talking a little bit to Richard and Lisa about him last night. And at that point in my life, I was probably so I was almost about to turn 20. I was trying to figure that out and understand it. And then also at that time, I was kind of like early in recovery from addiction. And I was trying to figure that out. And I had known a kid, this is a true story, I had known a kid when I was like 10, whose father had kidnapped him for like a long weekend during a very messy custody battle. And I was like, that story fascinated me. And the idea of a father who was somehow both, had some qualities of my father, but who was also had qualities of my own life, like addiction, really interested me as something to explore. But I couldn't get it to work, in part because I didn't have kids. Like I didn't really know the parenthood experience from the inside. I'm not necessarily a write what you know person, but you know that in this case it was just like slightly too remote. So I couldn't get the relationship between them to work. And then when I came back to it, for the novel finally started to work, which was like 2016. All of a sudden I had kids. But even then, I didn't realize what I think you're saying, which is that I didn't realize that I was really trying to explore my fears about being a parent. I was still thinking about it like I was trying to figure out all my own childhood stuff. But the big difference maker, the thing that opened up the novel for me was realizing that she was a daughter and not a son. It gave me like this little bit of separation that I needed to make her as much me as Ethan is me, and all of a sudden their relationship got really intense. By the time I finished the book, I suddenly like awakened as if from a dream, and I was like, oh, what I've really been doing is writing through my fears about like not wanting my kids to turn out like me. So I just like, it's like somehow superstitious, like if I put it all on a page, it'll prevent it from happening in real life. And in fact, it actually made room for me to have all kinds of conversations with my older kids that I wouldn't have been able to have otherwise. I would not have been able to talk to them about like, addiction, mental health, and those sorts of things without kind of exploring Jolie and Ethan.
What ages are your children?
I have 4. So I have a 14-year-old, 14, 12, 7, and 4. And they all, anyone who's a parent will appreciate this, all their birthdays are like within 6 weeks of each other. So they all change ages, like, within 6 weeks. And I can get people ask me that, and I have to really stop and think how old they are. But yeah, it's been really amazing, just in the last kind of 6 months or so, taking this book out into the world, like realizing how much it's opened up for me in my ability to like have a good relationship with them. So I had a piece in the Atlantic last week about the kind of talk that I've been having with my son. And so it was, the book really transformed me in that way, and it's a book that's sort of about transformation. These characters need to change if they're gonna move forward. Lisa.
My question is pretty close to what Maya asked, and maybe you've already kind of answered it, but are you, when you're writing, very conscious of them, your kids, reading, or anybody in your family actually, but especially your kids, reading what you're writing about? I mean, and whether you have to explain if it really happened, or, it's something that I always kind of struggle with,
Yeah.
because I write some skeezy
You're a
stuff.
much more responsible person than I am.
You wouldn't think so.
You have a much stronger conscience than I do. I don't know if anybody knows this story, that this Norwegian writer, Knausgaard, who wrote the 6 book, like very autobiographical series, and then he got sued by his ex-wife for her portrayal in the books. And there was this kind of like scandal in Norway, like how dare he write about her that way? And I, as a writer, was kind of like, I don't know, that's the break time. You married a writer, fair game. Yeah, there was a minor family scandal here in Mississippi too, based on a member of my family writing a book about other members of my family. But so in response to that, there definitely are people who I am initially, I must be initially concerned about, reading what I write. I'm not going to say it's my mother. But, and for a long time, kind of writing about, some of this material has been in other books. It's been, like I've done divorce before, I keep returning to that. I've done depression before, I think keep returning to that. I've done, drugs before, and I've done death before. But with the exception of death, I think the other three of those are things that I kind of wanted to go all the way into here so I could just then, get to the bottom and move on. And in order to do that, I had to get that fear out of my head. That someone close to me was going to read it and, it's a very personal, it's a very novelty novel, like it's not autofiction, but it's very personal feeling, and I think you get that when you read it. And I had to just let go of worrying about people trying to figure out, how much of this is you. With respect to my kids, this is really weird. I have zero anxiety about them reading it because I just think who I am on the page is the closest to the real me that there is. So that's sort of the target. And I think in the parent-child relationship, with some exceptions, just letting them know who you are, warts and all, has this kind of magic or talismanic property of, warding off damage. Whereas, particularly with addiction and depression, which are two subjects in the book, secrecy creates shame, shame drives, bad behavior. It's kind of, spiral that goes down through the generations. And so I think sometimes taking the leap and just letting your kids see hey, I'm human too, prevents them from having to go through the same things that you did. And that was really, that was the great fear of parenthood for me. And it's weird. It's I didn't think about it when they were babies, but all of a sudden they get to whatever age you were when you were facing the most adversity, and you're like, oh God, you know they have to face adversity. You don't want them to be sheltered totally, but you're I really hope you don't have to go through that particular thing. And talking about it is a way almost to ward it off, or that's how it seemed to me.
We'll talk again when your kids are in high school.
Yeah. Well, I do think people talk about development, the developmental steps or something, and I'm that thing's a spiral. You just keep coming back at higher and higher levels to the same thing. So I'm in this nice little, valley, peaceful valley with my oldest, having gone through 7th grade and come out the other end. But I know it's coming back.
I think it bothered my kids more about the stuff that I made up.
Oh,
than the things that might be true.
Your twisted imagination.
Mom,
Yeah.
what is the matter with you? That kind of thing. So.
I would probably that would be their big takeaway. What's the matter with you? Bill, I think, had a question about.
In both City on Fire and Second Coming, you have the ability to turn location actually into a character. It's like Walter Mosley can do it. Is just something to actually strive to do that, or does it just sort of happen in the course of the narration?
I think it's just some kind of brain damage that I have. I find that, when I'm walking around Oxford here, or wherever I am, locationally, it's not there's me. I just saw this movie Inside Out 2 today. It's not there's me, this little character sitting behind my eyes, having my feelings, and then there's the objective world independent of that. To me, it's like the world I'm moving through is animated by whatever mood I'm in. So I'm always happy here in Oxford, and it's like little cartoon bluebirds are flying down from the corners of the courthouse and landing on my fingers. And then you can get in a really bad mood when you're walking around and it's like raining and everyone's face looks ugly. There's not this sharp distinction we think there is between the objective world and the subjective world. Like it's all kind of tangled together, and in a lot of ways, like my characters in both novels feel like they're prisoners of their subjective world, like they can't get out of it, and the solution somehow is for them to realize that they're sharing a subjective world with other people. That's the journey these two characters sort of have to take. They both open the novel feeling very alone and imprisoned, and so their world, the location feels like a prison. It's all closed rooms, no people around, deserted post-lunch streets, janky Chinese restaurants, like that kind of thing. And they have to find a way, to enter a space where they can both be together and maybe change together. So it's almost like the books wouldn't work for me if the location was just treated like static backdrop. I want the location. It's like she's sitting there almost feeling like the lazy Susan and the air conditioning are like conspiring against her. And we've all felt that, I think. So I like that way of having a slightly more animated sense of place. Half of this book takes place in New York, like the last book. And I was very conscious of wanting to do a different New York than mid-70s New York. I wanted to do kind of glum, recession New York, 2011. But half of the novel is about the rural South, which is where I grew up. And I grew up in North Carolina, but I kind of transposed that to the eastern shore of Maryland, which is very similar. And so getting the locations to contrast with each other and to show kind of the different possibilities in both places was something I was very conscious of.
I've been living in Garthland today.
I do it every day. So.
It's a pleasant place to be from the outside, at least. But in one of your interviews, I really liked what you sort of made this distinction between cerebral books and emotional books, and how you wanted this book to be more in the emotional camp, which is kind of where my taste runs. Do you feel pressure to put ideas into your work, and then also because it's a book about depression, death, addiction. When you're writing,
a comedy about those things,
your stuff is funny too. But when you have a day where the scene is particularly dark, do you measure the success of that day by how sort of down you feel, or are you just happy to have had a good writing day?
So to the kind of cerebral versus emotional question, I don't tend, and this goes to the idea of being read by family members too. I just don't respond really well to a sense of pressure as a writer, and that's interesting. I think there are some writers who do, because I know some writers who put themselves under pressure when they write, and there's something in me just rebels. So if I'm if I'm sitting down at the desk and I'm don't have ideas, avoid ideas. Ideas are boring. Then it's what I write will end up being full of ideas just out of sheer spite. So I try to just clear my mind of any sense of external pressure, so that there can be room for what feels like internal pressure, the pressure of the story trying to express itself. To the question of emotional versus cerebral books, it's both a question of the books themselves and how people read them. So everybody, we're here in Oxford. I don't know how many times today I've had the conversation about which Faulkner book to start with, and it's Absalom is a great book. It's particularly great if you just read it emotionally, but it has this fearsome reputation because it's also brilliant and difficult. And some people and I'm not going to say they're all men, but like seem to really get off on that. And like Faulkner's towering intellect or something. And I just don't read that way. So for me, a George Eliot, a Steinbeck, Toni Morrison, those people are, equally brilliant. And I find in their work, it's easier to get to the emotion. So yeah, for this, I just really, the thing that I wanted to keep front and center was emotion, not because of outside pressure, but because that's what's front and center for the characters. As for the ideas, they just kind of percolate in, I guess. The relevant ideas here seem to be like, what is a self really? And like, how much are we stuck in it? And then a big one is like, can people change? I think anyone who's ever had parents, which is all of us, has had that thought at some point about how frustrating parents can be, and you're like, are you capable of changing? And that's a big question for a kid. But it's also really relevant for the child. It's like, can I change? Or especially at like 14, life just sucks sometimes. You're like, is it going to be like this forever, or can I change? So those are ideas, but they're not like big, intimidating, complicated ideas. They're like human ideas that are also full of feeling.
And I just want to make a comment about that. Like you were saying earlier, how you kind of wrote the book and you realized, oh, this is like my lesson to my kids, don't turn out like me. But then sometimes kids look at their parents and it's like, I don't want to be like you. And that's kind of what teenagehood is about, like trying to be your own person, but looking at your parents. And it's like, you always fear that you're going to become your dad or your mom one day. And then you grow up and realize just how alike you are. So I wonder if there's like some of that
so
in
that's
there.
the twist, right? And that's where the title comes from. So the title is a few different things. It comes from there's a Walker Percy novel called The Second Coming, but it comes from a Yeats poem. And the poem, which is an epigraph, the falcon and the falconer. Falcon cannot hear the falconer. And I was just interested in that as a figure for parenthood. But it's also the name of a Prince project. The movie that you all know as Purple Rain started out as a project called The Second Coming, which is like a lyric in controversy. And there's like Prince all over the book. Prince is this hugely important figure for Jolie. But The Second Coming also is like, points to the way that she is like the next kind of iteration of him, and how is she going to be the same as him, and how is she going to be different. The wrinkle to what you said is the strange way, you're like, when you're a teenager, you're like, I'm nothing like you, and I will never be like you. And sometimes in the middle of, like, in doing that, you're like, actually like reenacting your parents. So I was so like, I was really set on not being like my dad, who was a novelist, and like somehow, like I got to a certain age, 35 or something, and I was like, if I hadn't tried so hard to resist him, I wouldn't be so much like him. But then you also get to a place where you're like, maybe that's not such a bad way to be, and maybe that's just how life is supposed to work. It's very mysterious.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing, a nonfiction book, there's that Andrew Solomon book, Far from the Tree. But like a nonfiction book can't quite capture, I don't think, the mystery of the parent-child relationship. How much are you just repeating history? How much are you breaking away from it? How much are you combining the two to create something new? And so I really wanted to write a novel about it. Anything else? Going once? Going twice? All right, and we are done. We are closed. Thank you